all I can say is that, at this stage, I'm so invested in both of those worlds that I can't get rid of either of them, and I get lots of gratification, excitement, inspiration from both cultures in different ways. And I don't want to see either of those cultures collapse as they seem to be and sometimes on the verge of. China is my drug of choice. It's a little bit Alice in Wonderland, everything's a little bit off, it's not very comfortable, but that's what I like.
Today we'll bring you another episode of many jaw-dropping stories about China, once again with our wonderful friend and guest, David Moser. A sinologist, linguist, jazz pianist, and author of A Billion Voices, China's Search for a Common Language. David is currently an associate professor at Beijing Capital Normal University. Today is the second part of our conversation back in April, and he'll share with you how he taught jazz inside PLA Army Base, jammed on guitar with the rock star Cui Jian, saw the Tiananmen Tankman video in a Chinese museum, and how he ultimately finds a striking mutual decay in both US and China, countries that he calls both homes. So with that, enjoy. Last time we talked about your early experiences in China, including how you went to Beijing in 1986 to help translate the book by Douglas Hofstadter, Gödel Escher Bach. That process took 8 years, and during that time, Tiananmen happened.
That was so sad. I remember 87, 88 in my dorm room watching this He Shang, that documentary, twice. I remember seeing it on TV, thinking, whoa, wow, this is really breaking the boundaries, because it was critical, very critical of the government, and very much an advertisement for the Geiger Kaifang, the economic reforms. I knew enough about it to kind of get that. And then 88, and then I was actually in China in 89, but it was only when the protests started be happening, and I was going home. I had no idea what was going to happen, and I wasn't in any danger or anything. So I went home, and then it happened when I was back in Bloomington with Doug, by the way, doing what I don't know, but that happened that morning. We got the news, and it was horrible. But I thought I'd never be able to go back. I said, "There's no way I can go back and just keep up this interaction with China. Just no way, right?"
Because you thought you would be shut out, or because
I just thought China and it would just be closed off, or it would be in chaos for years, or something, or Americans wouldn't be allowed in, or who knows what, right? I just thought this is not. And yet, Wang Jingshou was still there, and he was lobbying to get me a visa, because he was trying to help me get in to do more research on Chu Yi and crosstalk and things like that. And so, lo and behold, fall of 1989, got my visa, and I was back in Beijing in September of just after the massacre. And I thought, well, this is really weird. How can I? And it was a changed Beijing. I mean, it looked the same, but I mean, you could still see bullet holes on the apartment buildings on Chang'anjie, and people were, it was during that time also that we got some of the translators of the book out by faking. But actually, they knew. I mean, anyone who could get out would get an automatic green card. So I went through Doug at Indiana University, and sent these letters to the embassy saying, I want to invite so and so to be in my research group. Oh. And his research group was artificial intelligence, and here's a biology student. They knew this was wrong. It's fake. But we got several people out, which was good. I think really changed their lives. I won't mention them, but two of the translators were able to escape and build a whole different life outside that. So that was happening, and I remember going to the Military History Museum. The famous Tank Man video, right? I went into they had an exhibition at the military museum about the crackdown and everything.
The glory.
It was glorifying the soldiers for crushing an anti-revolution, counter-revolutionary rebellion, right? So it was a glorification of the troops that had cleaned out the square, right? But I was going through the exhibit, and it opened in a room, and there's being projected on the wall is the Tank Man video.
Oh.
And I'm thinking, wait a minute, this could not be shown here. Why is this being shown? And then I listened to the voiceover and said, this video is proof that the soldiers were not indiscriminately slaughtering, people. Look at this one man, and the tanks are all stopping for his safety, blah, blah, blah. So they were twisting it was spin, they were twisting the meaning of that, or the implications of that video. And this just blew me. I couldn't believe my eyes. But they even put that on TV for a while. But they gave up even trying to make any sort of rationale for what had happened. And so they had a choice of telling an alternative version or not saying anything at all. And they in the end, they said, we won't say anything at all. But there was this brief moment that the Tank Man video was shown all
over China.
People don't know that. They think that's impossible in the same year. But it happened. Lots of weird things happening then. But I have to say, the reforms kept going, and things came back to some kind of normalcy pretty fast. And despite everything, and the economic, I would say, what happened was the economic plot went way up fast, and then the political aspect went down and sort of in tandem, diverged, and that's pretty obvious, right? But people were still really focused on getting rich, getting out of the Danwei system, jumping, Tao Hai,
And as a Laowai navigating these waters, I mean, did you have any idea where you were heading to? I mean, were you becoming a scholar? Were you becoming Chinese?
Well, I started teaching at the Foreign Studies University, and I thought, let's see what happens. I was under a lot of pressure from people that said, you're really crazy. You've got to go back home and get a job in academia, because the longer you're stuck in China, the more you can't go back. But I thought, let's try this a few years or something. And so I got a pretty good job at I had an uncle who lived there for a while. But I got a job at the Foreign Studies BFS, the Huaiguo Yuan. I guess in English it's called the Foreign Studies University, and the Chinese name is Beijing Huaiguo Yu Daxue. 对. So the Chinese name is Beijing Huaiguo Yu Daxue, and the English name is Beijing Foreign Studies University. They have two different names. I keep forgetting that, So I taught there, graduate students, translation theory, and some other things. And I learned more from them than they learned from me, because their English was already good. Most of them were master's students. Their English was good. They'd already done translation. And so mostly in the class, we would talk about examples, and they would sort of get me English advice from me, but I was getting a lot of Chinese advice from them. And it was great. It was great because it was a class. I was supposed to be the teacher, and they're supposed to be the students. But because we were kind of coming at it from two sides, it became more like a kind of a seminar where we're all just kind of, solving translation problems together. That was, that was wonderful. It was absolutely great.
And I take it'd be fair to say that you never thought you'd be part of the jazz revival of China when you first went to China. Could you talk about your jazz story in China?
Okay, yeah, well, it was the same kind of thing. You said earlier, that I do all these things, So music was one of them, I don't think I ever had enough talent to really be a jazz star. I just didn't have it. I didn't have the technique. I didn't have the motivation or anything like that. But I did love it, and I wanted to do music, and I still do, right? So it was a big decision to give up the music professionally and just go into the China field, right? But one of these serendipitous things that happened, I happened to be in China at the exact moment that as it was opening up, you begin to have Chinese musicians, mostly rock musicians or pop musicians, that were intensely curious about this thing called jazz, because they could tell that there was something special about jazz that was different than pop music, that it was a sort of a musical form that you could never reach perfection or even anything like completion. There was always a process. No matter how well you play, you're never there. You're always moving forward and making advances, And that's not something that you really get in pop music. If you play the tune, you do it, that's it. And you do it the same way each time, You don't really change much. But jazz, each solo is a new attempt to do something, right? So they were aware of that without me even saying it, because they could hear it, they could feel it, right? But what they didn't have was the technique and the repertoire and how to dive into it, how to get a foothold in it. So this was also a great. I said just a few minutes ago that I loved being a bridge, and this was a place where I could really be a bridge, because at my mediocre level, I was still much higher than they were, right? At least knowledge-wise, if not performance-wise. So it was great. And also they respected me and sought me out, because it was like, he's an emissary from this country, as if anyone who comes from the US must know jazz, but, and so, I actually was spending part-time teaching at a place called the MIDI School that had a lot of guitar players, and teaching them what improvisation was like and what the swing feel is in the music and how to do it and stuff. So I was doing that. I was doing some work with the PLA Army Band.
Oh,
that wanted to set up.
They were interested in jazz too.
The Army brass were not interested, but the musicians were really interested. So that was. I met this guy at a jam session, and he was a PLA soldier with the People's Liberation 解放军军乐团 is called. And he played saxophone, and they have all these players, right? And they're bored because you just play how many times can you play the national anthem?
Right.
So I wanted to do something more interesting, right? So he said, he wanted to do a big band. And he learned by listening to Benny Goodman on the radio, on the VOA, right? He said, okay. And
on the VOA?
He listened to the shortwave radio, right? Shortwave radio.
The enemy's radio?
They still had shortwave VOA broadcasts, They would block them, but... So anyway, so there was their army band was it was a PLA base, right? So I couldn't go in as a foreigner. So they would sneak me in, and I would get down in the car. Under the car.
I've done that once.
Yeah. And but we did it. I bought some charts and wrote some songs, and I directed and then taught them how to do it. And that was the first big band, jazz big band. And so once they got a repertoire and they got pretty good at it, then they started getting jobs on New Year's Eve, because a lot of the foreign hotels wanted to have a big band for New Year's Eve, because that's traditional United States custom that on New Year's Eve TV shows have these big bands and stuff like that. So they started to make money, and once they started to make money, the generals and the army officers said, hey, what are these people? So they sort of took over the band after that, and the poor guy who had set the whole thing up, he lost control over the band because it became a money-making thing, right? But things like that were just so wonderful, right? So I saw this generation, going from zero to beginning to understand the music, and then the new generation now that were born in the late 1990s or early 2000s. It's their native language. They grew up hearing that music. And the reason why the early ones couldn't is if you're 25, 30 years old and the first time you hear jazz, you're already a mature musician, you'll never really, it's like learning a foreign language. You'll never get it right. But if you grow up hearing it, and, then you'll speak it, so to speak, like a native. Yeah. And that's, you have some young players now that are just awesome. They're unbelievably good.
And how did you meet Cui Jian?
That was the very first time I did any jazz at all. Was this very special night? So I was at Beida, and
this will be in the 90s, 96, 97.
Not that late, 93, 94 probably. Right. Still, yeah. The same time I was doing xiangsheng too. And so this a person, a student, a graduate student, said, "What do you miss about the United States? I said, not much. Jazz. I miss jazz because it's not on the radio and you don't. She said, oh, I know someone who's a jazz pianist, and they have like informal performances. You want me to put it in touch with him, you know? And she gave me his telephone number. I called him up, and he said, I hear you have jam sessions. He said, yeah, come. Yeah, great, fine. So I borrowed a trumpet. I didn't even have a trumpet. I borrowed from a Japanese guy. I borrowed a trumpet, and I went. It was at what is now Guomao, and there was a Maxime's, Makashimu, right, on Chongwenmen. But this was a branch of Maxim. It wasn't that original one, and they actually had jazz, what we call jam sessions, which is there's no audience. It's just the musicians are playing and for themselves, right? So that night that I went there, it just so happens Cui Jian was there. And plus a lot of the other jazz players that I would later know better and would work with, right? They just, because the jazz scene was very small. It was just a few saxophones, a bass player, a drummer. And Cui Jian was a great lover of jazz. Oh. He played trumpet, right? He actually played trumpet professionally. And even his concerts, he still played trumpet, right? And his sax player played the suona, Liu He, who recently died, by the way. But anyway, that night, they were all there. And they said, this is David, he's from the U.S. Oh, wow, from the U.S., oh, cool. You know, so I had the trumpet and we were playing a little bit. And I was thinking, you know, these people, they play okay, but this doesn't sound like jazz. They're not, the language is not pure. There's something weird about it. But this guy came up in a sort of T-shirt, tie-dye, and a flugelhorn, kind of a trumpet. And I said, this guy has, he has a style. It sounds pretty good, you know. And actually, I knew who Cui Jian was, and I'd heard his music.
But you couldn't match the
Yeah,
person.
I didn't. I'd never seen many photos of him really or anything, you know.
And you didn't expect the Michael Jackson of China to just be there.
No, right, exactly. So during the break, the guy who had invited the piano player said, you know, Mo Dawei, you should meet this guy. You know, you get to know this guy. And I said, oh, yeah, he plays pretty well. I said, yeah, this is Cui Jian. What? My mouth dropped. You know,
dropping moment.
Yeah. So we had a little conversation and everything, and he's very kind of not shy, but very, you know, kind of modest, soft spoken, you know, and also just very serious about the music. He doesn't act like a star. He acts like he's just concentrated on the music. But he says, you know, I really want to play jazz. You know, I really. And so he actually invited me to his house, and for a few times, I give him some harmony lessons about how jazz works and stuff, and play a little bit.
Do you stay in touch with him?
Many times after that meeting, we would see each other because he would go to the clubs, and we'd see him in the club. And there was a couple of times he invited me because he was doing some music thing. Someone wanted an album, he wanted to get some ideas. He wanted me to. I think I played piano on one of his albums, but I can't. Or no, I played piano on something, but it didn't make it onto one of his albums. But so I still occasionally would see him, not so much in the last few years, but during all that time, yeah, we ran into each other, and we sometimes do things.
Yeah, and so you began being plugged into the world of performance, entertainment, TV, and I mean, the Beijing TV came. Ask you to do a show for them. The CCTV came and you became the presenter. I mean, how were those years like? You know, was it fun, exciting, stressful, nervous?
Well, the TV, the CCTV thing where it was the English language show, that was like a real job. So I taught I was teaching at the BFSU for Beijing Foreign Studies University. And then got this offer to work for CCTV and the educational channel for an English program, right?
And the money, 希望英语.
希望英语,
yeah. It's the biggest English speech context for high
yeah,
school
the speech
students.
contest is huge, yeah. So it paid pretty well. And so I said, well, maybe I'll take a break from academia and do this. So I don't know how long I did it. It was something like at least 2 or 3 years, maybe, not that long. But it was... So I was doing translation, I was doing hosting, I was doing everything, mostly a lot of revising of scripts and things like that. I would propose things that I knew worked well on TV because I'd seen American network TV have these ways of doing things. I would try to explain it to them, and they said, "No, that would never work." They said, "No, for example, like most talk shows have a kind of a regular bit that they do every single night. So like if you've seen those shows, they have a little thing like David Letterman has the top 10 list, and it's whatever it is, every night the top 10 list, the top 10 worst doctor at Oscar, performances or something like that. And I said, you have to have these things that are like, every time you do it, and it has a change, because the audience then knows that, and they're waiting for it, and they want to see it. They said, no, that would get old. No, you don't understand Chinese audiences. They'd never go for that. They start getting bored. You have to do something different each time. They never believed me that I could give it. So I was doing the thing, and it was kind of fun. But if you know anything about TV, it is so fake and just. I mean, it's all about appearances and fake, and you have to put on a happy face. It's so shallow. But I mean, it's TV, and I knew that, right? I mean, but I did learn a little bit more about TV. But things like, we would go and I'd have to introduce some new noodles in Shanxi or something, and so they would say, "Stand there, okay. Oh, the light is not so good. Can you move that thing over there?" We'd spend like half an hour to get the set with the camera and the lighting that works, and then the color, and get the trash out of the way, get the microphones all set up. They say, "Okay, 开始." I said, 说什么呢? They said, "Oh yeah, what are you supposed to say?" I mean, it just didn't matter. You say anything, The content was not the point. It's just to look good,
right.
And that was so frustrating. It's so stupid, But the people in the people in the program, were very nice people, very likable, very funny, and they were having a good time. They felt very proud to be working for CCTV, and they were very dedicated. And I just had a great fun. I learned a lot from them. Really, I had a great time with them.
Did you come across any interesting characters?
I wouldn't say interesting characters. I mean, they were all young people. They were all intensely focused on Hollywood and Western stuff. There were some interesting censorship things. I mean, I found out that CCTV, every show like that has a party official whose job it is to kind of monitor what you do.
Right.
They don't actually take part in planning the shows, but they just monitor. They just look at them
like a political commissar.
Yeah. And then there was one there, and there was one thing we did a lot of these skits for kids and everything, and that was kind of interesting also because it was when bootleg DVDs started becoming, exploded on the market, so that you could buy.
I mean, every street corner had
every street, and you could buy a DVD of the new Spider-Man movie before it even came out in the U.S. It might be in Russian, but it would be the DVD of the movie, right? So anyway, they would do these things, and so back then it was Finding Nemo was this. If it's not a Disney movie, I don't know what it is. About
I think
the fish.
It is. Yeah. It's huge when I was in primary school.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So they were doing a little skit on that or something like that, and. So there was a kind of a Sherlock Holmes thing. It was a murder mystery or something, and one of the kids said, I guess it was Zorro, the guy, the swordsman. They said, "Oh, look at this. There's this mark on a pillow. This might be a clue." And instead of holding it up like a Z, he held it wrong so it looked like an N. Oh. So he said, the killer's name must begin with N. And they said, who could it be? It could be Nemo, Finding Nemo. I said, no, Nemo's a fish. How about, Newton? He said, no, Newton is a physicist. He lives hundreds of years ago. He couldn't have done it. He said, Nixon, Nicholson, right? Maybe it's him. He said, no, he was the president or something. So we did a skit, everything is it. Then, like a few days later, they said, we have to refilm the skit. Why? They said, you can't make fun of an American president
They were more invested in protecting the American president than the Americans.
And the fact that this was a silly skit, it didn't mean anything whatsoever. It just had to start with an N, and it wasn't about Nixon.
No.
It was just that. And they said, and so this is when I first realized, boy, are they ever overly cautious? Who would care? No one would say, making fun of the American. But then I thought, oh yeah, Nixon is like a heroic president to the Chinese people because he's the one that brought them together diplomatically, right? So it must be that, right? And so we don't even want to make a joke about him in any way because we revere him as the Americans. I thought, oh, this is just so ridiculous.
I mean, you've had your share of experiencing censorship in China. I mean, from the 1999 New Year Gala, doing TV skits and doing interviews. I presume by this point, nothing is really strange to you anymore.
It's sort of like, it's still strange, but it's strange that I got used to. That's a good way of putting it. It's still very strange to me. But I mean, it's kind of like Chinese food. It always tastes good to me, But I'm used to it, right? So I don't go, "Whoa, this is amazing Chinese food." No, it's Chinese food. I'm used to it, right? So this like bizarre, it's strange, but that's what happens here. It's weird.
I'm dying to find out what the actual original script of your Truman performance was. I'm pretty sure whatever they deleted was pretty innocent and innocuous and mindless.
Yeah, I wish I'd kept copies of those scripts because it would have made a good sort of illustrative, example of how things work. Yeah.
And you've been teaching in China for 30 years now. And do you notice changes over the years?
In the education system?
Well, in the way you teach, in the way the students respond in different universities that you have taught at over the years.
Well, a lot of things happened. First of all, these young people and Chinese in general began to learn a lot about the West and the US and became, very cognizant of what was happening in the West. And there were no longer these naive questions. In fact, gradually by the 2000s, a taxi cab driver knew more than I did about American. They'd ask me the price of certain cars, and I said, I don't know, $20,000 US. They said, what? That's not right. I didn't know the cost of cars, or the NBA, stars. Which basketball team do you like? I don't know. I don't watch basketball, right? So it became, they became very knowledgeable about the U.S. And the students also became very knowledgeable about the United States and English and English literature and all sorts of things. People were because they could actually directly watch the movie or read the book or listen to the podcast or whatever it was, and they could actually go there, or their friends could go there and come back and forth, right? So this enormous surge of information flowing in and out of China was a huge difference. Just in the 10-year period, it was like night and day.
Yeah. Is there some sense in which the inferiority complex had been overturned into some sort of superiority complex over the years? Because it feels like it's different now, right? The Chinese
It is different now, but I would say it took a little longer. Yeah. Because even into the early 2000s, people were still, I think they were happier and they're certainly prouder of their own country than they were. But there was still a sense that, we're still second fiddle. We're not, we're not as advanced as you are. But now, in the 20, I would say around the time, just before and after the Beijing Olympics, there was a turnaround. Lots of nationalism in the late 1990s. There were these series of books, China Can't Say No, 中国可以说不. Do you know these books?
Yeah, I heard, but
I have the whole set. There's a whole bunch of them. So the first one was 中国可以说不, and it was like a nationalistic thing, and it was such a hit they had another one, right? And so the next book was 中国可以说不, and then the next thing was 中国为什么要说不? There was like everything's about 说不, a whole series of them, and I still have a whole set of those. And then before and after the Olympics, there's lots of pushback against the Western countries, especially the United States. But that didn't mean necessarily pride, a feeling of superiority. They still kind of felt like we're being bullied, and we should at least stand up for our own country. But in that interim, after that, in the 2010, 11, 12, then that's where we are now. This big turnaround, where Chinese were the borders were so porous, and so many people living a life in two different countries, having kids and sending them to the U.S. and lots of information going back and forth. Nowadays, even me, I have the same feeling when I land at the Chicago airport. I think, God, what a dreary, old-fashioned, sort of dilapidated airport we have here. And I'm going to the T3, T4 in Beijing, and it's like a science fiction movie. It's so amazing, So yeah, I mean, Chinese, I think, hey, we're not second place now in many ways, and that's pretty solid now, as you know. You're the generation. You're at this generation now where I guess when you grew up, China was already starting to kick ass globally when you were just a kid, even, right?
I have a hard time trying to understand what's going on and what's happened. And obviously, I grew up in the era where China was taking off globally in every sense of the word, and its global influence was skyrocketing. And my family itself, we've lived.
That's right. This is the world you grew up in, right?
Yeah, exactly. And we've had better houses. Every few years we moved into somewhere bigger. We would eat restaurant at slightly higher prices. Yeah. And then we begin to travel to more destinations. I mean, it was unheard of to go abroad when I was little, and now it's just so common. Everyone's doing it, and going to all kinds of exotic destinations, and you hardly go anywhere without seeing Chinese. So
that's right.
I mean, the reality of this takeoff is undeniable.
Yeah.
But for me, there are lingering questions, right? One, is it sustainable? Two, how unequal is it? Because obviously China is a huge place. So even if you have like a just tiny chunk of the country doing well, that's still a few million people.
Yeah.
But at what expense? What about the rest of the country?
That's right. Yeah.
So there's a takeoff, but who are really taking off? Is it the first million, or is it like 1.4 billion altogether? And so I have those questions, but obviously, the new buildings in Beijing look fancier than New York and
than the ones we're looking at right now.
Columbus. My hometown in Ningxia
is much better than this place.
Very nice buildings. And, but I'm a liberal, and I don't want to have any sort of superiority complex, and I genuinely think China has a huge facade, and official China knows how to put on a show. That's why they do the Spring Festival Gala and have this idealized image they're always trying to strive for. But underneath is a lot of cracks and potholes that are sort of shoveled away.
Yeah. Well, I think, I can't speak for the Chinese, but I think I kind of understand. For a long time there was Deng Xiaoping's, one of his slogans, 是发展是硬道理, right? Development is, or how do you,
the hard logic
is the ironclad principle, maybe, or something like that.
Something like that.
I'm supposed to be a translator. I can't translate it for shit. But and I think there's still that lingers still today. In terms of party propaganda and stuff. It's like that kind of fajan that's really material. Is visible, and it's very easy to point to it, and it's very easy to feel it. It's like, gosh, this wasn't this way 10 years ago. Now look at it. It's like they're really performing, and But I think what's really obvious to a lot of people, especially the people of your generation, but also people who are just aware and maybe more educated, that there's more to life than that, and they're still failing in the spiritual sphere, the freedom to expand consciousness and to do things that that go against the grain and things like that. People feel constrained by that, and I think they can feel that that's something that someplace like the United States has more of. This, I don't know if the word spiritual is the right word, but 精神, 自由. So that's a big piece that's unresolved, that people still feel like China's not really able to provide that.
Yeah.
But for a lot of people, the material benefits and the expansion and the fajan, is pretty much good enough to keep them.
That's been going on, and it's been a good deal, and it's good for all house owners who seen their properties values rise over the past year, although it's tanked a little. For me, I'm always hesitant to join this circus of praising how great
gung-ho China.
Yes,
China, yeah,
exactly, and how great China has become.
Right.
Because I think whoever can speak have been the beneficiaries of this good ride. And whoever that
can't
didn't,
speak.
exactly.
Yeah, right.
If you're not literate, if you didn't make it, if you got left out of school in high school because your grades were not the top one in your whole year, so you couldn't go to a good high school in the local area, so there is no chance you would go to university. And those folks have been left out, and they don't have the channels to speak.
That's right.
They don't have necessarily the interest to speak. They're working their fields and losing their jobs and being forced from city back home.
Yeah.
And so I'm quite hesitant to say, well, China's gone so much ahead, and
but you can see and feel what maybe sort of ordinary people who don't think, China and the U.S. are not that dissimilar in that way. In that really, if you go out and just interact with ordinary people that we're seeing out there, their minds are not on these issues. They're thinking, I wonder if I can get that pizza tonight, or I wonder, they're thinking of the moment and how they can get a better job or something like that. This is not on the top of their list,
Or except they already earn 5 times higher than the average Chinese, so 6 times or whatever.
But they don't even know that.
They
right?
don't.
It's not that they feel that and they feel privileged, or they just feel like, Americans are so privileged and they don't even understand. They don't have a glimpse, an inkling of knowledge about what's happening anywhere else in the world, right? Keep in mind also that we have a president right now in the United States that's getting pretty busy trying to crush dissent and to make anyone who says anything bad about him or criticize the government to shut up, shutting down the VOA and Radio Free Asia, and shutting down everything.
Well, Department of
Education, and getting rid of CNN and CBS and NBC.
Cutting funding for Columbia University.
Yeah. What can you say? This is a kind of, life goes on, things change. I would say right now America is almost undergoing as big a change as China was undergoing during the 改革开放 era, but in the wrong direction. It's like it's going backwards, or not even backwards. It's going to a dark place that we thought America was immune to.
Right.
Yeah, we thought that our democracy was so resilient that no one could possibly reach that pinnacle, and yet here he is, and he's doing exactly what any autocrat will do, right? And there's not much we can do to stop him, So, maybe come back in another 10 years and let's compare China and the U.S. at that point and see what's happening. Who knows? It really is hard to say. They may be both awful. They may be both dystopias, right? Who knows? Anyway, but coming back to me,
as a Lao Wai
navigating this. Yeah, for me it's distressing because the China that I was hoping for didn't really materialize the way we thought it might, that it should have. It seemed,
and could have.
It could have, yeah. But then I'm also looking at my own country and I'm thinking, that at least was something that I thought was going to be a basic, stable, unchanging fact, a sort of reality that was always there. America wouldn't change all that much in terms of its political system. Its problems anyway, income inequality is so terrible and stuff like that. But now both of these countries that I'm so invested in and spiritually and intellectually tied to are both in very unstable, problematic, chaotic conditions, and it's very distressing.
Yeah. And for you, you've basically lived half of your life in America and half in China. What is America to you now? Is it still home, a place that you go back to? Is it different? Is it distant?
I'd say if China and the U.S. were as cut off as they used to be in the 80s, 70s, and 80s before the internet, you know, I would be there in 1986, 87, and sometimes not have any idea what's happening in the United States until I could get my hands on a New York Times or something like that, right? Nowadays, everyone, you can get instant information to the whole world, right? I'd say I'm spiritually attached to America, but I don't feel any need to be physically there to be part of that attachment, right? I'm still American. I still have the mindset of an American and the attitudes of an American, and still a kind of, I wouldn't say patriotic, but at least disposed well to a country which I think has some good aspects, very good aspects historically. China is another matter. It's more like the country that I feel drawn to for various reasons, for self-improvement and self-actualization. A lot of what I tell to my students and friends, one of the biggest advantages, you think you're going to learn a lot about China, but for the first exposure, for the first few years, you're really going to learn a lot about yourself and things you didn't know, and some bad, ugly parts that has to do with American, growing up in America and having this sense of global, superiority and these kinds of things, which we all fall into, right? I said, you go to China, you will figure out that you are not who the person you thought you were, and that you are perceived differently by them than you would be with your colleagues and friends in the United States, right? So I think, one of the advantages of going to overseas, but especially a place like China, it challenges all of your assumptions and your things growing up, So for me, it was not only just I was curious and had feelings for China, but I also felt for me it was also kind of a learning experience. Not that I'm selfishly trying to improve myself or something like that, but it was a transformational decision that made me make great changes in myself that I wouldn't have made otherwise, or I wouldn't have even thought, And now being married to a Chinese woman, and then we have a daughter that's in the middle there, and I see how she's grappling with these issues. All I can say is that, at this stage, I'm so invested in both of those worlds that I can't get rid of either of them, and I get lots of gratification, excitement, inspiration from both cultures in different ways. And I don't want to see either of those cultures collapse as they seem to be, and sometimes on the verge of. So it's a hard time for me. It's a hard time. It's a little depressing. In the same way I see Trump chipping away at all these democratic norms we had, China's chipping away at some of the freedoms and expansions that were in process during the Geiger Kaifan in the early 2000s. That took so long and
so much effort to build.
And seemed to be on such a solid path of a trajectory, right? And that no, not necessarily. You can have the highest tech and the best internet, and still have a closed off, system that's spiritually and emotionally, in its own little bubble. They figured out how to do that, and this is all very distressing. And for me also, at the age I'm at, I may not get to see what how this all turns out.
So you stayed in Beijing all these years, and Beijing it is your home. It's become your home. It's where your family is. It's where you're spending most of your life. Is Beijing still the Beijing you loved?
Yes and no. It's changed in so many ways for the better in terms of convenience. Certainly, the subways and things that make a big city livable. But it's so big now. It's gradually becoming unlivable. It's not really one city. It's like LA. It's like 7 or 8 cities. Most people spend their whole lives in one section of Beijing because it's just so far away. The traffic is horrible in some places, but it's huge. It's too big. It's a little bit inhuman. But I have to say, the Beijingers, the ones who have lived there their whole life and everything, who are just the average people, I don't think they've changed a bit. They still talk the same way. They still act the same way. They're still funny in the same way. they're fearless. They'll come up and say anything to you and talk to you in any way they want. A lot of them still live in the hutongs. That part of Beijing just still seems to be there. And a lot of us foreigners really cherish that because it's part of a past and it's part of this present, but it's like the human part of Beijing that's still there, the beating human heart of Beijing, because all these overpasses and these huge buildings and these Sanlitun and all these night spots and stuff. That's a new kind of Beijing. That's kind of very Western and very sensory overload. You just go to a shopping mall and my eyes glaze over. There's so much there. But you go into the hutongs there, which I occasionally do, and there's the same old grannies and grandpas there, and they're very helpful. And I don't know, I still like to go to those little restaurants and stuff, and talk to them, and go to the parks and watch them do Tai Chi or something like that. It's fun. That part's still there. It's very nice. It's very human. You go to Gulou, it's still very Beijing.
Yeah.
And that's, here we are, 2025, and so those people are not they don't harken back to the 1930s or something, right? Yeah. But there's still this stubborn Beijing, and I don't know. I'm so used to Beijing, and I don't know why. I just feel very nostalgic about it, and all the history. When I still look at remnants of the Beijing city wall, they're so romantic still to this day. Like all the glory and tragedy of Beijing, the Qing dynasty, and all that stuff is right there in front of your nose.
Then what's changed? Why are foreigners leaving?
One big reason is that it ceased to be a career choice. The foreigners who came flooded in the 1990s, got this special dispensation. They would, because they needed foreign, especially in multinational corporations like Motorola and stuff, you needed to have chief executives and people there that were foreigners. And so they got these wonderful expat packages. So the kids could go to school, and they had these living in these luxurious villas and driving, getting a driver limousine and all this kind of stuff, huge salaries. And then, of course, they begin to localize as the Gaiga matured, and you didn't need the presence of these foreigners, right? So a lot of those people went away. A lot of the middle range workers and executives also decided, I could probably do as well elsewhere. It wasn't as good. The package wasn't as attractive as it used to be, and so forth. And then, other things, the horrible pollution of 2010, 11, 12, 13, those few years were terrible. I mean, they was dangerously polluted. To their credit, they've solved that in less time than you thought. But when my daughter was, we thought of leaving. Any people with kids, foreigners with kids, thought we got to get our kids out of here. They can't live in a polluted environment like this. So a lot of people left because of the pollution. And then U.S.-China, just the relation soured so badly that people begin to feel strange, feel like they weren't quite welcome, didn't like to be an American there, was no longer a kind of a prestigious thing, or there was suddenly this tension, this political tension that spilled into every aspect of daily life. And then COVID. Yeah. So lots of, but in another sense, we're not really sure why. And why the numbers of American students willing to go to China and study abroad and study Chinese language just dropped precipitously after 2008, after the Olympics. And we still to this day don't really quite know why.
Oh, it dropped after 2008?
Yep, right away. The pinnacle was 2008.
Interesting.
So everyone
I would have thought is COVID, but actually...
No, it was before then, yeah. Oh, it was before then, yeah. The flight away was not because of COVID. The COVID was just the death knell, the nail in the coffin, sort of. Those of us who were in education and study abroad had constant meetings about this. What's going on? Why are they not? And it is true that gradually Americans probably began to think less of China as a lifetime employment opportunity, like a career in business in China, began to see that wasn't quite very realistic. So they, because they lost hope for that or interest in that, then the language was less important to them. So people stopped opting to take Chinese in college. But we're not really sure why exactly. It somehow the magic kind of just went away, and people. I'm not sure exactly what it was, because it was pre-Xi Jinping, so it was not a sense of him now as a new sort of type of leader. That's certainly maybe part of what is happening now, and then after that. But it happened before him, and we're not really quite sure why. And maybe that it was a bubble that had to burst at some point. I don't know.
Did you ever contemplate leaving Beijing? I'm sure I think about this all the time.
Yeah, I mean, during that time, of course, we thought about it a little bit. And then, my wife was getting much better jobs than I had, working for PricewaterhouseCoopers and other places. But I think also as Beijing grew and become more of a metropolitan area and stuff, it became more expensive and harder to live there. Buying a house was harder and harder. And it wasn't like the 1980s where if you bought a house, it would double and triple and quadruple in price in the next 3 or 4 years, right? So it still is pretty good investment, but it's not gonna increase its value that much. No. So all the things that made China and Beijing sort of very worthwhile and interesting and worth exploring and worth considering either evaporated, or people became disenchanted with it, or I'm not quite sure exactly why.
I think it's fair to say that U.S. and China have been drifting apart. China has been more enclosed than in the past. How much do you think back to the examples of Americans who stayed in China after 1949? The Angst family, the Hinton family, there are a few of those. Who stayed, who went through the whole charade of Greatly Ford, Cultural Revolution, who had their fair share of the experience.
Some spent jail time.
Some spent jail time.
Sidney Rittenberg spent a lot of years in jail.
Others became Red Guards themselves.
That's right, yeah.
And danced with Zhou Enlai, and also played a role connecting China to the outside world after.
The Crooks, David Crook and what's her name? Isabel Crook. And the true believers, yeah.
And do you see yourself in that image at all?
No, it's different. It's different, I think. Some of those people, very different from me. I mean, they were enamored, living this dream about the Communist Party.
And they were diehard Maoists.
Yeah, they were diehard Maoists. They were ideological. They were in favor of that. For me, no, that had nothing to do with it whatsoever. I mean, if nothing else, that was a turnoff, right? Although still interesting. I mean, I'm sort of very interested in it and like to study it and think about it, but it wasn't any reason I would want to stay in China. The fact that China is sort of going back to some of that for admission into the society, and that the U.S., at least for the time being, Trump is sort of moving in that same kind of autocratic style of leadership. I don't know where I'd rather be at this point. I really just don't know. For me, I still like. There's something about the culture in China that just attracts me.
What is it?
There's a joke that I've made, but in some sense this is true. It's like China is my drug of choice, right? And it's much less harmful to my body than cocaine or ketamine or something like that, or fentanyl would be, but it's my drug of choice. So it's like, I'm sort of 60th generation, right? You want to have an acid trip, like experience some transcendental, enlightenment for these drugs.
As good hippies do.
Yeah, as good hippies do. But for me, China is kind of like that. In other words, I think, I can't be objective, but I think I'm a type of person who likes stimulation, right? And some people are like that. My friend Doug is the same way. Always stimulating yourself, reading a book, learning this. You never just relax and just watch a TV show, And I think for China, that's my stimulation, So if I'm in the U.S. and let's say the water heater breaks and I need a plumber to come and fix it, and he comes and he does that, it's the most boring thing in the world. But it's if it happens in China, and the guy comes, well, he's speaking with an accent. Hey, he's not from Beijing. Where is he from? And I try to talk to him, and he talks and he asks me lots of questions, and he has some strange ideas I've never heard before. And it's like this. It's a little bit Alice in Wonderland. Everything is a little bit off. It's not very comfortable, but that's what I like. And some people hate that. They say, it's exhausting. I want to go back home where I feel comfortable.
Right, where everything is smooth and
smooth
easy.
and for me that's boring, right? So, and I think that's that a lot in common with the people who've stayed a long time.
Yeah.
Is they like the buzz, they like they like the difference, the fact that you're never fully comfortable. You're always a little bit on your toes because you're not quite native to this place, And some people like that, and I think I'm just like that. It's my drug of choice.
This is the end of our episode today. If you liked it, do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcast, and to our Substack too, with links in description. And with that, I'll talk to you next time.